Do you think that's something that people struggle with? They know that they probably have got it within them to do whatever their version of a long adventure is, but actually it's almost overwhelming in its size. So they say, oh, I'm just not going to start. Whereas if you take it into its smallest possible components and start checking boxes, ticking things off, I think most things are achievable.
I agree. I mean, I was very disciplined on the first ride, not thinking about St. Augustine and the ocean. As excited as I was to experience that ceremonial dipping of the tire in the Atlantic after doing that in the Pacific, I focused intently on not thinking about that because it was just too overwhelming for me. And so therefore that led me to that, what I had mentioned about the chunking. And it does play mind games with you. There were times when, I did find myself, especially in headwinds. I would rather ride in like a 20% grade, pouring rain or whatever than this headwinds. It's just plays with your mind, and it's very difficult. And then you start thinking about, St. Augustine, and you're in the middle of Texas on one of those roads that Forrest Gump says, I'm tired and I want to go home. And you are like, this is not a good place for you to be mentally. So I really forced myself, and it helped tremendously to because before I knew, I think the first time I counted miles was in, I had just come down off of Emery Pass. That was the highest point in New Mexico. I was in one of the deserts right before Las Cruces. And I was in a tent, and I finally just added up the miles that I had ridden so far. And it was like 800 or something. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But then I said, you know what? I still got 2,000 some miles to go. I said, so don't do this again. And so I didn't for a while. So, but on the race though, it was a little bit different because there was a Facebook public Facebook Transamerica public post that would go out pretty much every day, and they would take videos of Abdullah, for example, cresting the Hoosier Pass in the Rockies or arriving at the Yorktown Victory Monument. And that gave me goosebumps. So I did allow myself, especially in the middle of Wyoming and Montana, where I was, completely isolated, a zombie some days, to think about that joy of arriving at the Yorktown Victory Monument. And yes, I did think about Bumpus, Virginia, and Lael and that whole thing. Those types of memories did allow me on the race to stay motivated.
So We Get Outdoors Nation, everybody responds to a tipping point moment in their life in a different way. Some people bury their head in the sand. Other people try and carry on doing the same thing, but in a different way. And other people make a complete radical change. Today's guest at one point in time a few years ago got told his job no longer existed. And what we're going to find out today is what he chose to do next. Mr. Larry Walsh, welcome to the We Get Outdoors podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Excited to be here and very excited to talk to you about my story. And hopefully it can help others that might be going through what I went through, which is being told that you're no longer needed at 56 with pharmaceutical company for about almost 30 years. So excited to be here.
Wow. So when you first got told we're eliminating your job, we don't need you anymore, what was the first set of reactions that went through your head? So
for me, it was not really knowing what I wanted to do. I wasn't overly excited about, the last few years of work. I would come home and just talk to my wife and say, I don't know if I can do this for another 10, 12 years until retirement. So I didn't realize it at the time. It was a blessing in disguise. It was part of a restructuring, organizational review. And, they were very, very, very good to their employees. But shortly thereafter, I had 3 children. I have 2 kids out of college, and one that was at the time was in high school or actually middle school. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't getting exercise, which is my passion. I'm a basketball player, a competitive player, over 50 league, I've always played college in the Army, and I wasn't getting exercise, didn't have a job. And I just remember one day, I said to my wife, I said, I just can't figure things out. So, I started riding my bike for exercise around my small little town in Mendham, New Jersey. And I all of a sudden started thinking about the plane rides that I used to take from California to New York City, where my company was headquartered in New York City. And I had my job in California, and I would look out the window at these planes and just marvel at the landscape below and just sort of wonder what it was like to live in the middle of America. And then, thought about, gosh, maybe someday I'll ride my bike across the country. Why not? And so that was sort of, probably an April timeframe, Rob, and of like a month and a half after I lost my job. And then one Sunday afternoon, I was riding around Mendham, New Jersey, and I came home after about a 10 or 12 mile ride. And my wife was in the kitchen. I said, Kelly, I said, I'm thinking about riding my bike across the country. And I don't think I was thinking about it. I think I'd made the decision already, but she was all in. She said, just go for it. I know you want to do that. And that's it. It was just sort of a series of, and I remember it just on the bike in this little quiet little town of Mendham, just said, I want to do this. And that was it.
Was there any particular trigger where you went, yes, this is for me? Or was it a slow accumulation over that sort of 6-week period, or what was it?
Well, I was struggling. I was struggling, physically and sort of, I guess, emotionally, trying to figure out what to do, Rob. So that part of it was really instrumental with Kelly's support. When I say I was committed to doing it, I still had, the right and the left shoulder, the angel and the devil, right? The angel saying, follow your dream, follow your passion, go for it. You only live once. This side is saying, you've got a family to support, go get a job. I mean, so it was shortly thereafter, we were down at the New Jersey shore, and I was with my family, and we're out on the beach, and just beautiful sunny day. And my 3 kids were around, and my eldest daughter's girlfriend was there as well. And I said, kids, what do you think? Dad's thinking about doing this. And my girls said, Dad, YOLO. I was like, what's YOLO? You only live once. And I had never heard that before, as silly as that sounds, because now I've heard it a lot. And that was it. And I said, these kids at this age have the wisdom beyond their years. I called a bicycle shop. I bought a bike. I bought panniers. I was REI's best customer for about 6 weeks. I went to the bike shop, small little bike shop. I'd bring them Dunkin' Donuts, coffee, and sit there and take little phone movies of changing tires, which I hadn't done in 40 years or 30 years. And then I found it was timing. It was sort of just alignment. I found an organization called the Adventure Cycling Association. And I just happened to see them online, and I called. There was a route that was from California to Florida in the fall, starting in September, self-supported, no van. I wanted to go big or go home. And they, I talked to the lady, again, a young person who, I said, listen, I'm not a cyclist. what kind of bike should I get? And like, do you think I'm too old for this? And she said in a very nice way, she didn't say it this way, but you'll be one of the younger ones there. So so sure enough, I signed up for the Adventure Cycling Association. There were 11 of us that met in San Diego on September 15th or 16th. I had, a month and a half to train and learn how to ride a bike with 90 pounds of gear. And that's what I did. So the night before I flew out, we had a nice little party in town, and I was ready to go. And just before that, I would say just the last thing I would mention is I'm not social media savvy. That was not something that I was ever interested in. I did part of it because of my job requirements, but it just wasn't something I was ever interested in. And my family convinced me to open up a Facebook account. And then I started posting. I think, I mentioned this earlier. I started posting daily updates at night as much as I could. And I found those to be a way for me to close out a day, to mentally prepare for the new day. But also I was receiving, friend requests by the dozens and so forth. And I realized that there was some interest in kind of what I was experiencing. So I felt I wanted to try to communicate what I could about what I was seeing, who I was speaking to, is, without overthinking it. 5 minutes every night, didn't worry about the spelling. I just rattled off stuff for the day. And that's really how it got started. That was kind of, I guess, a couple of tipping points, Rob. It wasn't just one. It was sort of a series of moments that I remember very clearly. And it had to come naturally. I didn't just say, okay, I'm going to do it. My mind was I guess I allowed my mind to kind of take me to where the next point. And finally, I have to say it was probably right down there at the beach when YOLO dad is like, okay, I've got to do this. My kids are behind me too, right? They think their dad's crazy, but they're also behind him. So.
Quite a few years ago, I circumnavigated Scotland in the UK in a kayak. I paddled all the way around Scotland. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 days into the trip or the expedition that I actually realized what I was doing. Because, often I'd go kayaking for a long weekend and you'd put your tent and your food inside and so on and so forth. And about 4 days in, I was like, jeepers, I'm kayaking around Scotland. Wow. When did this cross-country adventure of yours actually become truly real for you, where you're like, holy shit, next stop, Florida?
Well, I would say that I flew out to San Diego, and then I stayed at a motel in San Diego. The next day we were meeting the group. I went into the hotel room and I unpacked and repacked probably 3 or 4 times, thinking that I have to be efficient when I'm on the road because, I knew it was going to rain at some point. I don't want to be, I want to be putting the tent up and all that stuff very efficiently. So I was occupied that night, but the next morning that was okay. I was like, I guess I'm in San Diego and yeah, whatever. The next morning I woke up and I'm like, oh my God, I guess I am doing this thing. So I packed the bike. I walked out of the motel. I was, I guess, excited. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And then I rode 4 or 5 miles to the youth hostel where we all met. And at that moment, I just remember like walking up saying, where's everyone at? I said, I guess there's no turning back. I mean, I'm doing this thing. And I was also very, very anxious because I kind of knew that or at least I thought that a cross-country bike ride was the culmination of a life journey of cycling, and it wasn't the first step. And I was doing it the first step. So I thought that everybody I was about to meet were going to be experienced, top-notch cyclists that I was wondering if I was going to fit in and wondering what I could do, what I could bring to the table. That was it. It was like that first day, I guess, that the moment I woke up and then the day, and then right when I arrived at the youth hostel to meet everybody, I'm like, I guess there's no turning back now. So
I know the feeling. Now, there's often adventures like this there's a tipping point, obviously, but normally there's an accumulation of life experiences that equip you to go and say, actually, I'm going to do something different. And so I suppose you told me off air, you were in the military, you've got you majored in chemistry, you've worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 30 years. What were some of those things that equipped you to say, actually now's time to do something different? Like, what were there moments in your 30 years beforehand which were preparing you for this without you realizing?
So little did I realize back when I was much younger, I liked doing different things. I didn't necessarily want to just sort of go with the crowd. And I before I went to college, I wanted to be an NBA basketball player. And if I couldn't do that, I was going to be an electrician. And, thankfully my folks said, let's sort of put another plan together. And I did. I went to college. I played basketball in college. And then I went into the ROTC program. Back then it was 82. It was shortly after the Vietnam War ended in 75. And so they were ramping up the service again. So we had a lot of ROTC recruits on campus, and they said, "Hey, you look like someone that might fit the bill." And it was a job after college. I heard the word adventure and travel, and I could still play basketball. So I was all in. I graduated. I was the only one of 398 that received a commission in the regular Army. We had 3 or 4, I guess 4 others in college that actually received commissions in the active reserve, but I was a regular Army officer. So within a week or two after graduating, I had driven to Alabama to start my military career. In the service, I went to Ranger School. If others can do that, I figured I could do it. I remember seeing people with the tab, on their left shoulder, and that was a challenge. I said, I want to do that, and so I did. I jumped out of airplanes. I did airborne school. I did Pathfinder school. I went to air assault school. These are schools that I did because I wanted to. I wanted to try something different. I wanted to see if I could achieve something that I thought would be pretty cool and pretty difficult, challenge myself both mentally and physically. And that's what I did. I played basketball in the service for the post, the champ or the post teams. And we competed, and I was in Korea for a year, and it was a great experience. So over the course, Rob, of all of these, I guess, years, I was doing things. I was sort of putting myself or trying to put myself in situations where I was uncomfortable and just wondering if I could achieve something that would be different and memorable, and not just necessarily kind of falling in line with what everybody else was doing. And so, as I wrote the book, I kind of, a lot of the book is reflecting, and I didn't realize, as I'm writing, I know what the overall story is, but I'm just thinking about reflection of growing up and all the different things that, I did. And I realized that, this is a life that is something that I've been trying to sort of put myself in different situations for as long as I can remember. And so I think, I think that would be how I think about the bride, is that this seemed cool to me. This would be different. This would be memorable. And it's not something a lot of folks have done. And so I'm sure that was part of the subconscious of everything that kind of went into play.
That's awesome. And I do want to step into the world of assumed constraints in a little while. But one of the things I've noticed about myself and lots of other people that I've interviewed is that What are the reasons why people don't go and choose to ride across the country, or whatever it may well be? Jump out of an aeroplane into a lightning storm was another one. I've interviewed a guy who does that. One of the things that stops people often is that they're worried about what others will say. They're worried about, like, will people still accept me if I choose to follow a different path? And it's interesting that what you're talking about is a life of choosing to not follow the usual path, or to make so people are kind of. Do you think the people around you were habitualized to, Larry's good at coming up with crazy ideas for things to go do, and this is another one, so we'll just send him on his way with a smile on his face?
I guess I'm not sure how to. I'm pretty introspective. I'm pretty quiet. And if that makes sense around folks, I'm very, I love being around people. But I'm not the life of the party, if you will. If I'm in a room of 50 people, I'm having a conversation with Rob. That is the important conversation. Then the next one is the important conversation. And that's the way I've always been. So I suppose folks have said over the years, or thought maybe this is a wacky guy that's doing different things. But I don't know. I think it was all inside for me that once I decided I wanted to do something, and yes, I wanted to do it on my own terms. I realized the path, and when I had my career, I definitely realized there was a natural path to get to the next, which is certainly I was caught up in that as well. But even there, I decided, when I was with a pharmaceutical company on the sales leadership path, you kind of go this way, right? This job, the next job, the next job. I took myself out of the normal path because I wanted something different. And I wanted to see then if I could get back into the funnel of senior sales leadership. And I did. And I did that because I wanted to do that. And whether people thought that was odd or not, I don't know. I do say now, and after all these experiences, I hope I'm around for another 50 years, but I don't know if I will be. But I want the kids. I want the kids to know to follow their dream, to don't let others define who you are. Be yourself and enjoy life. And that's an important message. And I hope that I've been able to sort of demonstrate that through action. I would say that it's interesting. So many meetings talk about leadership. So the companies, we would have our national sales meetings and all these plenary sessions with the invited guests that come in and so forth. And they talk about a lot of other people's stories oftentimes. And I oftentimes wondered how many of those folks actually had the experience of stepping away and doing something on their own and talking about it through their own experience. And that was important to me. And I would say that when I found myself, when I was in the training department for a couple of years, I was the guy on the stage. And, oftentimes it was the other person's story and it just didn't feel real. It didn't. It just felt sort of, there's something missing here. So that's part of it, Rob. It's everybody has a story. Riding across the country is not as difficult as some might think. I think who has 3 months to do it is the challenge, right? And if you're not really a good athlete, who has the time to prepare for it? So totally understand that. And so that's part of why for me, I like talking about it, because I realize that a lot of people probably would like something like that to do, but they just don't have the time, or whatever reason is holding them back. No regrets. That's the thing. I guess going back to the tipping point, I guess it was an aha moment. I'm sitting there really at the cusp of whether I pay the fee to join this organization to go on the ride or not. It was middle of July. And I just remember thinking I was going to sit in the same chair that I'm sitting in right now, speaking with you around the Christmas holiday season. and have not, taken the plunge, and I would regret going, not that I didn't go for the rest of my life. And so I said, that's not, I can't do that. So, I'm glad the angel won that argument and not the devil. So
that's incredible. I often ask when something happens to me or to one of my clients, I often ask that they often say, why has this happened to me? And I often flip that and say, well, how about if we ask, why has this happened for me? And maybe them eliminating your job is a for me opportunity.
Well, I didn't realize it at the time, but I do mention that very clearly. Completely agree with you. I wouldn't say it's as much why are they doing this to me, but like why, just in general, why? I mean, I'm a loyal, I'm a committed, I'm going 110% everything I do, and yet something, whatever, I was a number, right? So here you go. There's 30 of you guys that have to go. So it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't a personal thing at all, but it was definitely like, why, and, but little did I realize that it was a blessing in disguise. And, I have no idea what tomorrow is going to hold, but I know that, if someone would have said, Robbie, you would have said, 3 years ago, you're going to be in this place talking to Rob about 2 bike rides across the country. I would have said, you're nuts. What are you talking about? And yet here I am, and I'm just thrilled. I really am. And eyes wide open, and a great history, a great career. And maybe I'll go back to do a second, version of the farm. I have no idea, but right now it's like, this is great. And I totally agree with you. One door closes, the other one opens up. You don't realize it at the time, though.
That is very true. That is very, very true. So when we go and do big adventures, I often find that the physical side of things, while challenging, usually takes care of itself. If you weren't fit enough in the first week, you will be by the end of the second week. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, you get accumulatively fit. But I often find that the 2 biggest challenges people face is a challenge of their own mental self-talk as they're going through their adventure, and also that all of the people who they meet along the way. And so I suppose I'd like to start this little bit with who were the people you shared time with? What were some of the people experiences you had? What were some of the ugly people experiences you had? But equally, what are some of the incredible people experiences you had?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways. First, there was 11 of us that we met on the tour. We introduced each other the night before we left. We divvied up the group gear. There was one gentleman from Germany. Everyone else was in the United States. From the United States, one youngster is like 35. Everyone else was retired and all had, families and had careers. And we all were responsible for cooking and all of that. So during the day, I'd ride on my own for the most part, but you left in the morning and then you ended the day meeting up at the campsite or wherever you were going to meet up. And so I think it was just, you get to know everybody. But by the end of the ride, there were probably 3 or 4 of the folks that sort of you just riding at the same, a distance at the same pace. You just find that you're arriving at the same grocery store at the same time and that sort of thing. A lot of, early on, it was a lot of, what we did, who we met during the day. That was part of our campsite conversation. We had our map meetings to get ready for the next day, but it was all about, hey, what'd you experience today? Who'd you see? And that sort of thing. And then when we arrived at St. Augustine at the Atlantic Ocean, it was, again, basketball player, it's 30 seconds to go. You're up by 2, you win the game, place goes crazy. You're excited, jumping for joy. You arrive at the Pacific Ocean, took some pictures. We got everybody's contact information and hugged, and everybody went back to their life. And there were a few people on the beach, and I kind of remember thinking, I wonder if these folks have any idea that this group of people just, and why would they? There was no fanfare, nothing else. It was was different, and it was cool, but it was different. So that was the group that I rode with, and I'm in contact with some of them now, and it's been a great experience to get to know them. They're all cycling and stuff, and it's just really exciting to have met those folks for that limited period of time, 9 weeks. They're your family, and then you're leaving them. What was so motivating for me was on the ride itself. I was meeting new people all the time. When you look like we did, it's easy to have a conversation. I love chatting with people, and it was very easy. 5-10 minute conversations, and you're on your way. There were just so many different examples of conversations that I just really made the trip come to life. And there's one, I guess one or two I could share. So I think I mentioned part of the reason I was on this ride is I couldn't play basketball. So, so from the time I left San Diego to when I got to Shepherd, Texas, 1,928 miles into the ride, I had not seen a single person playing basketball. I noticed there was a bunch of courts, but no one playing basketball. I just thought that was odd. So I'm riding up to Shepherd, Texas, late afternoon, small little town, and I notice a pavilion on the left-hand side. I see two people underneath at a basketball court playing the game. I said, oh gosh, this is like, I had goosebumps. I've walked up, I dropped my bike down. I walked up, and it was an older man and a young teenage girl. And I walked up to them, and they stopped playing, and I introduced myself, and he said, basically something to the effect, this is going to be an awkward, introduction, but I wanted to introduce myself. This is who I am. I couldn't play basketball. I started riding a bike. I'm riding across the country. You are the first people that I've seen play basketball. I'm so excited to be here. The guy was having nothing of it. He was completely, the first time, no facial expressions at all. I'm like, oh my God. So I just, whatever came out of my mouth, I'm from New Jersey, blah, blah, blah. And he, of a sudden, he kind of opens up and he says, oh my gosh, I'm from New Jersey too. I'm a retired police officer from Paterson, New Jersey. And I hit at that point why he was protecting me from having this conversation with him and this other, his granddaughter, as it turns out. So from that point, we had a nice couple-minute chat. He wished me well. And, I just chalked that up to another amazing journey, unexpected journey on this trip across the country. And that's the type of interaction that I had. And on the tour, on the first one, I was talking to everybody, and writing about it. And that's what attracted me to keep going. Just, it's like, wonder who I'm going to meet next. Let me get on the bike and start going again. So that's just one example. So many others that I could share. So that's really the energy behind why you get on the saddle and continue pedaling for the next town, for the next interaction.
So, you've done in your military career, certainly you did quite a lot of things where you would go and get lost in your own head, I think would be the best way, and have to go and deal with, I don't quite know what's going to come next, but I guess now I've got to keep going. Did this ride stretch you mentally further than what you'd experienced in Ranger School or Airborne School or one of those things? Or what did you learn about yourself as you were cycling?
So the first day, the first 2 or 3 days were probably the most difficult. And one of the reasons is 10 miles into the ride, my group gear fell off my bike. Didn't know how to, I didn't know how to, I guess, pack very well. I tried to learn how to do that the night before in the hotel. The hills outside of San Diego going east are just very difficult. It was very, very hot. And I wondered, wow, this is really, really difficult. And then it was in Arizona. I think it was in Arizona. It was Arizona. I was riding on Interstate 10, and all of a sudden, my hands and my feet and my legs started to balloon. Again, hot, just hot, sunny, sun beaten down, and I realized that I wasn't. I wasn't getting rid of volume or of water. I wasn't urinating. I was just blowing up, and I was concerned about my kidneys for whatever reason that came to mind. So I got off the bike. I was on the side of the road at a truck stop for about an hour, hour and a half. I was drinking as much as I could. And then eventually I was able to sort of, kind of get in a good place where I felt like I could continue. But here I was probably 300-400 miles into this thing. And I'm like, wow, this is like really, really, really going to be a difficult ride for me. It got easier after that. It really did physically. The mental part, no doubt but I had a way to go about kind of thinking through the day. I never thought about St. Augustine. I thought about 10-mile segments. So if I was going to ride an 80-mile segment in one day, I sort of set my GPS to ping every 10 miles. And that would ping, I'd look down. I was like, oh, cool. I did it in this amount of time. And so I knew I chunked my day down into little bite-sized sort of goals. And that was, for me, much easier to think about than it was to think about this 3,000-mile ride across the country. So mentally, that's how, just reflection, I grab onto a thought, and then that would just stay with me for as long as I could remember. And then it would be a new thought and a positive thought, about the family, oftentimes, about my upbringing. We talked about that earlier. And so that's how I kind of stayed grounded. Texas, we had, that was the year that the Hurricane Michael came through South Florida. So all of those campsites were destroyed, but we hadn't gotten there yet. But in Texas, in October of 2018, Texas had tons of rain. And so we had about 12 days straight of rain. And, you're just kind of dealing with that. And I do remember in California thinking to myself, we were going through the desert. It's beautiful. I was like, oh God, I don't want to ride through the rain. But then when you got to the rain, it was like, bring it on. Just kind of, we're going to plow through. This day is going to end. This 3,000 miles will eventually end. Just bring it on. And it was difficult. That was a difficult part. There was a lot of flooded roads. But that's what I wanted, Rob. That's what I wanted to see if I could deal with that, both physically and mentally. And so you asked about what I learned. That's just another example. I put myself out there. It was successful, but by no means am I satisfied. I'm pleased with that, but I'm not satisfied. And that's probably part of whether I realize it or not. I did the second ride, or maybe I'll do a third ride. I don't know. But but for that moment and for that period of time, I said, okay, I accomplished this. It was difficult. I remember thinking I wanted it to be nasty weather because it would make the experience much more rewarding, knowing that it was more difficult to achieve.
I was actually wondering when you mentioned about the experience of getting to the Atlantic Ocean and you're all chuffed to bits, but the rest of the world around you just sees a bunch of people with bikes and they have no idea that you've just spent 9 weeks cycling across the country. I was actually wondering, was that one of the reasons for going a second time? Because you're like, almost it doesn't feel closed because there is no thing at the end. It's just like like when you get a firework and you set light to it and it doesn't go off, it just kind of fizzles out and doesn't go anywhere.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't know what to expect when I got to the Atlantic, and it was. I think I write about it was a little bit of a letdown. I'm here. I was excited. I couldn't wait to get home. I was going to miss everybody. We had a wonderful camaraderie, but it was something was missing. Early on, in the ride, there were two individuals that had mentioned they had ridden the Transamerica Bike Trail. I'd never heard of the Transamerica Bike Trail. What I did, Rob, was the Southern Tier from California to Florida is the Southern Tier. There's a Transamerica Bike Trail that actually began in 1976 during the bicentennial celebration. It goes from Oregon to Virginia. In the back of my mind, I had this idea, and it happened to be 4,200 miles instead of 3,100 miles. It happened to be 5 mountain ranges rather than, Emery Pass in New Mexico, which is a pretty nice, climb, but nothing compared to the Rockies. So in the back of my mind, I kind of had this as I reflect now. I mean, I think back, this is sort of where the seed was planted. And then you had mentioned that, by the second week, third week, and so forth, the physical part of cycling becomes easier. I couldn't imagine, going into a basketball season saying, I'll just get in shape over the next week or so. It's just not the way that I was, the sports I was involved with. That's not how you did it. But I had heard this idea that you ride yourself into shape, and it's true. So towards the end, I would get into camp and, I still had gas in the tank. I was like, okay, I mean, I'm with the group, so I'm stopping, I'm camping, but I said, I want to keep going. So, and so when I got home after that first ride, I had taken so many movies and pictures and so forth. And I set about, I created a film like on iMovie, a basic, amateur level film. And just to sort of, capture, memorialize the event. And we invited some friends over to watch it. And they were engrossed, and so was I. And I love watching the ride. I love talking about the ride. I saw the energy and the focus of everybody that would come over. And that's where I started to have this little sort of seed, like I wanted to do something else. And then also when I was interviewing for jobs at that time, I figured I'd come back from my first ride, I'd go, get a job. And I found myself, more excited answering questions about the bike ride than about the job itself. And that told me that, okay, I guess I still had the cycling itch, right? So, and that was really, that was sort of the genesis, I guess, of this second ride. I don't think it was as much the letdown per se, which it wasn't, I shouldn't even use that word. It was an amazing experience, but it was different. I think it was, this idea that I enjoyed it. I was pretty good at long distance cycling. That's what I brought in hindsight, that's what I brought to the group, my positive energy, because there were times talking about leadership, in the course of that 9 weeks on the road where not everybody gets along. The weather was incredibly difficult. And I knew that that's the one thing I could bring to the table, and also my physical strength. My legs are strong. I'm a big, solid, strong guy. So I carried some of the extra weight, the group gear, the heavy stuff. So that was part of what I felt I could bring. But I wanted to translate that. I wanted to try something completely different. And that's really what led to this idea about doing something a little bit different, a little bit longer, a little bit more challenging.
And a race.
And the race, yes.
And a race. So tell me the idea of racing a bike across America. I'm going to ask probably very obvious questions or easy questions for you, but first of all, how does that get put together? Racing across America. I mean, that's not a traditional race.
So the quick backstory: the Transamerica Bike Trail goes from Oregon to Virginia, goes through Missouri and a bunch of different states. I'll have to get them down. But there's this guy that actually lived in a town that was on the bike trail. And the story goes that he told us a story at the pre-race orientation back in 2014. He's like, why don't we race across the country? It's a wonderful trail. A lot of people do this as their post-retirement, take 3 or 4 months and go. And that's the very common trail that folks will ride on. And so he started the race in 2014. Using the Transamerica Bike Trail, he started the Transamerica Bike Race. And so since 2014, that race has gone across the country, unsupported, no help. Rob, you could not send me, groceries to a post office in some town in the future. I would be, that would be cheating. So none of that's allowed. And those rules are very, very clear. I read about the 2016 race, and in that race, Lael Wilcox, she was in second place. She was about 150 miles behind the leader. I forget his name, Stefan something. And as I understand the story, it's in the middle of the night. Stefan wakes up, sleep deprivation, cycling the wrong way, goes back west. Lael meets him on the road. He realizes the error of his ways. He turns around. They ride together for a period of time. Hey, let's go finish this thing together. It's, gosh, this would be great, And she said, no, this is a race. And she goes on to win in, I think, a little over 2 hours. And I remember just getting goosebumps listening and watching that story about Lael finishing that race. And I just said, I want to see what it's like to be in this race just like Lael did. And so that really kind of triggered me to reach out to the organizer. And I couldn't contact him because I wanted to enter this thing. And he had been out actually on the road looking at the routes in the Midwest. Because of so much rain, they were going to have to detour and do alternate routes and so forth. So that was the reason he never got back. He finally got back to me. He said, listen, he goes, why do you want to do this thing? This is kind of crazy. There have been a couple of fatalities in Kansas the year before. A man was killed on Highway 96. The year before that, someone was killed. And so it was very clear. So he allowed me to go in. I mentioned my military background. I just completed the Southern Tier route. And so, we had medical clearance, we had insurance, we had all that stuff. In my same steel touring bike, I flew out to Oregon. Actually, a buddy from home took a week of vacation just to go out with me. And he was not in the race, but he was going to ride through Oregon and then just fly back home. So that was a great experience to have Roger with me. But I flew out there with the notion that I was going to finish this thing in 54 days or so. And again, going earlier, I sort of just did some simple math. I had finished the Southern Tier in 57 days, 3,100 miles. The most I did was 80 miles a day. So I just simply did math, and I say 54 days. I said, this would be kind of cool. Finish a 4,200 mile race in 3 less days than 3,100 miles. How cool would that be? And so we met in Oregon. We had the pre-orientation race. My bike was by far the heaviest. There was like a scale there. Some guy was, just for fun, just kind of weighing the bikes, all these carbon fiber bikes. And, I could pick it up with my finger. And here's this, this Surly disc trucker, this big chromoly steel frame bike. It was pretty funny. And I'm a big guy too. So I sort of stood out. And 73 of us from 15 countries arrived, and we left at 5:00 in the morning on June 2nd. On June 19th, and we all had spot satellite trackers, and that's sort of how everybody kind of knew what everybody was doing, and we were on our own for the entire time, just riding through 10 different states over 5 mountain ranges. And it was a very, very different experience than the tour by a long shot. But that's the sort of the genesis of entering the Trans-America Bike Race.
Yeah, I actually interviewed Lael a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month or two ago, actually. And,
oh my gosh!
Yeah, she talks about that race, but the other races that she's done as well. It's mind blowing.
Amazing. It's amazing. So it's actually so a really funny story. So in the race, our race, the guy who won it, he's a 25-year-old kid, a guy from Australia, and his name is Abdullah. And he finished that race in 16 days, and he averaged 254 miles a day. I finished it in 38 days, which, I finished. So I was probably one of the 60% of the folks that finished. A lot of, people didn't finish because of, whatever reason. They had, saddle sores or knee problems or mechanical problems, whatever. But he finished it in 250 or 16 days, 254 miles average. So about 4 days into he had already taken on legend status. We all knew where everybody was. And, this guy, Abdullah, like, oh my gosh. So I'm in Dayville, Oregon, and I'm camping one night. I was at the laundry, cleaning my clothes, and I'm outside talking to 3 adults. They had a child as well. And just, they're asking about the race. And, I'm just marveling at this, Abdullah, who's already so far ahead of the race. And they looked at me and they said, you do realize that you're in this race as well, don't you? And so that was, that's the type of, it's like a parallel universe almost for me. It was like, I knew I was in the race, but I didn't realize, because I was competing against myself. I was not trying to win this race. I had a strategy, which was to sleep at night and ride as much as I could during the day. I wanted to come home to a family. I wanted to finish this thing. I knew I wasn't that experienced. So it was, yes, I was in a race, but it was really, I was there for my own doing and what I wanted to achieve and accomplish and meet the amazing people that I did through the 10 states that I rode through.
It's interesting. I want to know. So when I interviewed Lael, she was telling me that she has a strategy where she sleeps 4 hours every night, guaranteed. And then she started talking to me about other people who sleep 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes at night, and they do that for weeks on end. Were you pushing it, or were you said you slept every night? Were you going for a good solid 8 hours of sleep to prepare yourself for the next day, or what was your plan?
Yes. So my strategy was to ride during daylight. I did not want to ride during the dark. I just didn't want, I had all the safety equipment that I needed. But I just didn't want to do that. And I knew I wasn't going to be, finishing this race in 20 days. So I wasn't, that was well beyond, I wasn't that group that did 45 minutes or 3 hours. That was not who I was. There were some people that tried to keep up with the Joneses and didn't too well. So for them, there was some scratching that based on because they were trying to keep up with the leaders. So I would stop anywhere from, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. I would, camp or motel. I was up at, 6 or 7 and good breakfast. And then I just rode. I think I rode the most I did was 16 hours in a day, probably averaged anywhere from 12 to 14. If I would do it again, in hindsight, I would definitely have not changed the strategy, but I would get up earlier and ride, pre-dawn. I did that a couple of times toward the end, and it's very safe. It's peaceful, and it would have helped me a little bit more in terms of my time. But no change for, I was never pulled, knowing that I was falling further and further behind. I was never sort of pulled to change my strategy. What I did change was how many miles I rode every day. because I knew I had put these limits on what I was capable of doing just because of what I thought would be a good finish. And I had completely undershot what my ability was to actually ride long distance. So that was, but I stayed with the strategy, Rob. I didn't change.
It's interesting when you do long distance things. If you're going to go and push it like some people do and reduce your sleep in particular down to an hour or 2 hours a day, you've got to be training to do that for quite a long period of time to get your body used to it to actually pull it off safely. I think because certainly for me, if I have less than 4 hours sleep, I get pretty rubbish pretty quickly and start making bad decisions, and then the world gets very unsafe very quickly.
No, I agree. I didn't train like that. Most of my training for the race, because it was a short period of time, actually, it was probably April, maybe 6-7 weeks between the time I decided. I have a stationary bike in the basement. I lifted, and then we live in a hilly area, and there's a road real close to my home. It's like maybe three quarters of a mile, pretty steep climb. And I just rode up and down Calais Road, and that was my training. And that's what I did. I didn't try to not sleep or whatever. I just figured I had enough experiences over the years of camping, of the military schools I mentioned, of knowing kind of my body and what I was capable of doing to some extent. So I didn't feel like I needed to sort of apply, put myself in that extreme condition. I just didn't feel like I needed to do it. And so I didn't.
Cool. So a minute ago, you started to step into the place of the constraints that you put on yourself, the assumptions that I will cycle X amount of miles per day. And I'm really curious, not necessarily about the constraints that you put on yourself there, but what are some of the other constraints that you think that other people put on themselves that prevent them from cycling across the country, racing across the country, or whatever their version of that may well be?
Well, I think the obvious one for cycling is the time. I mean, I talk to friends now, and I think there's a lot of interest, but who has the time? I do believe that there is this notion that it's too difficult to achieve, and I thought the same thing. And I'm not talking about the race, but I'm just talking about a ride across the country is not as challenging. Aside from the weather and mechanical and stuff like that, it's really not physically as challenging as I thought it would be, getting over that first maybe week or so hurdle. And so I think it's this idea that, oh my goodness, I could never do that. And so I think that is part of it. And so specifically for the ride, I think that's probably it. That, and then who has the time? People are working. They have a week vacation or whatever. They don't have 3 months vacation. And so that probably is not even an idea that enters their mind when they're thinking about, taking some time to do something that's really, really cool. They might just do a segment of the Appalachian Trail, or maybe they'll do a short version of a bike ride or whatever. But this cross-country idea, I think it's just probably a combination of those things that I mentioned.
And do you think that in terms of overcoming those assumed constraints that we all have, one of the things you mentioned a little while ago was you're sort of taking everything 10 miles at a time, chunking it into like eating an apple in bites. I mean, that's the analogy people use often. Do you think that's something that people struggle with? They know that they probably have got it within them to do whatever their version of a long adventure is, but actually it's almost overwhelming in its size. So they say, I'm just not going to start. Whereas if you take it into its smallest possible components and start checking boxes, ticking things off, I think most things are achievable.
I I agree. I mean, I was very disciplined on the first ride, not thinking about St. Augustine and the ocean. As excited as I was to experience that ceremonial dipping of the tire in the Atlantic after doing that in the Pacific, I focused intently on not thinking about that because it was just too overwhelming for me. And so therefore that led me to that, what I had mentioned about the chunking. And it does play mind games with you. There were times when, I did find myself, especially in headwinds. I would rather ride in like a 20% grade, pouring rain or whatever than this headwinds. It's just plays with your mind, and it's very difficult. And then you start thinking about, St. Augustine, and you're in the middle of Texas on one of those roads that Forrest Gump says, I'm tired and I want to go home. And you are like, this is not a good place for you to be mentally. So I really forced myself, and it helped tremendously to kind of, because before I think the first time I counted miles was in, I had just come down off of Emery Pass. That was the highest point in New Mexico. I was in the one of the deserts right before Las Cruces. And I was in a tent, and I finally just added up the miles that I had ridden so far. And it was like 800 or something. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But then I said, you know what? I still got 2,000 some miles to go. I said, so don't do this again. And so I didn't for a while. So, but on the race though, it was a little bit different because there was a Facebook public Facebook Transamerica public post that would go out pretty much every day, and they would take videos of Abdullah, for example, cresting the Hoosier Pass in the Rockies, or arriving at the Yorktown Victory Monument. And that gave me goosebumps. So I did allow myself, especially in the middle of Wyoming and Montana, where I was, completely isolated, a zombie some days, to think about that joy of arriving at the Yorktown Victory Monument. And yes, I did think about Bumpus, Virginia, and Lael and that whole thing. That those types of memories did allow me on the race to stay motivated, even though I did chunk it every 10 miles and whatever. But it was a little bit different for me because I knew I was capable of doing a cross country bike ride by that point. Now it was a matter of just trying to stay focused and really trying to maximize my daily miles so I could have that experience going over the Hoosier Pass or arriving at the Yorktown Victory Monument.
So there's plenty of people listening to this who've got their own aspirations. They've got the one days. One day I'll hike the PCT. One day I will, I don't know, canoe the Yukon. One day I will sail around the world. What pearls of wisdom do you have for those people in taking one day into a defined date in the future?
Well, I would just say my experience was I didn't overthink it. I would be here today, planning for a cross-country bike ride if I just didn't just step in and do it. And I think because there's so many variables, if I look at YouTube and watch all the people that have all the different training events that they've been involved with. I mean, my goodness, I met some folks that were, when I was at the bike race, like pre-race orientation, they talked about having a cycling coach. One guy talked about he had trained with a guy named Mark Cavendish, who I had no idea who that was until I asked someone, and I said, who's Mark? Why is everybody up on, because he's, obviously Tour de France fame.
Yep.
So, had I really looked at what everybody else did to prepare, I'd still be preparing because I just tried it. And so much of what, and I'm just thankful I did, it was a great experience to see America up close. And here's a novice cyclist who, good athlete, that just rode 7,300 miles in a matter of 10 months. I mean, one of those was a race, and, others can do it too if they have the time. So it's just jump into it, just do it. I think for me, that's the key. I don't know what else. I just don't know because there's so many reasons not to do it.
There's almost an acceptance I've had to come to over the years. I remember the first time I spent 3 months in the Himalayas kayaking, and there's a massive reality that you can never be ready enough, but equally you can never be ready. Eventually you just have to pull the trigger and do it, because if you wait until you're ready, you'll just die one day of 94 years old with a regret. I think the moment you accept the fact that you can never be fully ready, because of all the variables you mentioned, I think then that's the moment you can pull the trigger and go and get going with it.
One other thing I did, I did this purposefully, was to mention to a few friends and some family members that I was thinking about doing this. And I did that for a very specific reason, so I didn't back out, because I didn't want to let them down by so here's this guy talking about something, but then he doesn't do it, kind of that whole thing. So I did mention to a few people, and I told them afterwards why I told them up front, because I wanted to have that mindset that if I do decide not to go, I have to explain that to some people why I didn't, and I wouldn't have a good reason. So that's something else that I do recommend, and I did that on both rides. Awesome,
that's great advice. Now you step from there into writing your book, Suits a Saddle, and you mentioned earlier it's a reflective account of your own journey, your own experiences, what you went through. Beyond that, what do you hope that people take away when they read your book?
We live in an amazing country. I rode through over 500 towns, populations of less than, over 50% populations of less than 5,000. Genuine, good people. When we're in a car, you're riding 300 miles to the next gas station. Maybe you're going to stop and get a bite to eat. Little towns in America are invisible. On a bike, they're the next sought after destination. And you spend 5 minutes or 15 minutes and you talk to these folks, and they're just genuinely good people in this country. And so I think from my perspective, I think one of the reasons why I decided to kind of write about it, because I do believe I have a unique perspective. I was privileged to be able to do what I did, and I want to share those stories. I found it, and I still find it to this day, very difficult to concisely talk about my rides, because my mind goes to Texas, it goes to Montana, it goes everywhere. You asked about a story. I shared the one about the basketball. There's thousands of others. And I could talk to you for hours, Rob. I really could. But in a book, you can be more concise. You can kind of share the story, and you can kind of give the pearls and so forth. And that was part of the reason, because we do live in an amazing country. So I think that's the one thing. I guess the other part of it is, and this is where I'm getting a lot of the messages offline, thank you for telling your story, is there are a lot of folks that have been let go from companies, and they're sort of trying to figure life out, if you will. And a lot of people don't share the stories. When I reached out to the publisher, she thought I had a great story, and she said, this is the time of the story is particularly, it's timely. My wife said, this is, Larry, you should share your story because it's real. So it's just a story. That's all it is. It's one person's perspective. Now, in the middle of that, there's, the writing, all of the kind of the craziness, but it's the amazing America in which we live. And it's just keep pushing forward. And, that person that you're talking to, I'm talking to Rob, we're talking to each other. We each have our own stories, and, and everybody has an amazing story to tell. And that's it.
It's incredible. I've spoken to and interviewed a lot of people over the past couple of years since starting this podcast. And one of the key messages that comes out from through hikers who've done the PCT or the Appalachian Trail, cyclists, yourself, Lael, there's a long list. And one of the core messages that comes out is that despite what the news says, despite what social media says, we still live in an amazing country full of amazing people who are genuinely there to help and support each other. And I just want to say thank you to you for sharing that message, but also being a leader in lifting your head up and other people's heads up to what's possible and the reality of what America is today, not what it is that the press want to make you believe it is. So, Larry, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your adventure. I've got one final question, and that is, what's next for Larry Walsh?
Well, right now I am writing my second book, and it's 40 to finish. So love the alliteration. I finished the race in 38 days, but that doesn't sound good. I was away from the house for 40 days with the flight. So it's 40 to finish. So I'm writing that story as we speak. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know what the next chapter is. I have thought there's a third major cross-country route called the Northern Tier. It goes from Washington to Maine. I've thought of that. I'll be 60 next year, and I've thought about the Trans-America bike race again. And how cool would that be to finish in 30 days? So here's a 60-year-old finishing in 30 days. I just kind of like the way it sounds. I don't know. If I did it the second time, I would ride with a racing bike, though. I'd get a little bit lighter. So, but I'm just really enjoying right now with spending time with my family. I visit my daughters, my wife, and we're always watching our son play basketball, and just, that's just been amazing. I'm doing a lot of, I'm talking to libraries and, doing shows like this, just talking about the story, which I just really enjoy a lot. So that's kind of what I'm doing, at least for today and tomorrow, and who knows what the rest will hold. So
I love it. One chunk at a time. So Larry, if people want to find you, reach out to you, contact you, read your book, Suit to Saddle, which is brilliant, by the way, where's best to find you?
So my website is www.larry, LARRY Walsh, WALSH.com. And on there's short ride reels, raw footage from the ride. There's photos. There's what place where you can get the book. A lot of good information. So I'd love for folks to check me out, and I'd love to hear other folks' stories. So appreciate it.
Fantastic. So, Larry, thank you so much for your time today. You are an inspiration to thousands of us, if not tens of thousands of us out there. And everyone listen to this. Please go check out Larry's website, go read his book, and maybe get a bike and go and bump into him on a journey somewhere at some point in time. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it.